Okay, so you're gonna need two of your main fabric. Make sure that it's wrong sides out, right sides together. You'll notice that the main fabric pattern piece has a little tab on the end, and you're gonna need that. That's gonna be where you're gonna stitch your elastic loops in. You're gonna need just one of these pieces. This is for the chin, okay? And you're gonna wanna fold that in half and then give it a little notch, okay? Because that little notch is gonna end up lining up with the center of your mask at the bottom. For the lining of the mask, you can use any type of fabric you want. You can use the same fabric that you use for the main mask or a different fabric. And you're going to cut the pattern so that you don't have the tab on the lining. That's important because the tab, if it's on both the main fabric and the lining, the tab will cause a lot of bulk as you fold that over to insert the elastic. Now let's start sewing. Okay, we are gonna start sewing, and I have my pieces here at the machine. We're gonna sew right sides together on both the main fabric and the lining fabric. It's time for a top stitch. After both of these pieces are sewn together, you're going to want to top stitch both of them. I like to open up my seam on the inside of the fabric, and I like to sew down both sides. What you might want to do at this point is iron this before you begin to sew. I am not going to iron, I'm just going to start sewing. So now you'll have your main fabric piece that has a nice top stitch, and you'll also have your lining piece that also has a top stitch. What you're going to do is place these two together, right sides together, and make sure that you're lining up the centers of your mask. And then you can pin this. I would recommend pinning it, although I'm not going to pin it. I'm just going to make sure that everything lines up, and then I'm going to begin sewing. I'm only going to sew along the top edge of the mask at this point. So you're only sewing top edge. I'm taking 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So now our lining and our main fabric are right sides together, sewn only across the top. So what you're going to do next is you're going to flip this inside out, and you're going to stitch it along the top edge. You're going to make a top stitch. And this is going to keep everything in place and make sure that your lining and your main fabric stay in place. Again, pin it if you feel like you need to pin it. Pins are good. I'm just a little too impatient for pinning. Go slowly over the areas that have the most bulk. You don't want to break your needle, because then you can't make any more masks unless you have more needles. So now we can see it's really starting to take shape, but we're not done yet. Okay, so we need to stitch across the bottom. We're just going to do a straight stitch. We're not going to worry about that raw edge. Again, if you want to make sure that your centers line up and the fabric feels really smooth against each other, you don't have any wrinkles, everything looks good. So you put it on your machine, make sure everything's lined up, and just stitch a little right along that raw edge, just to keep things in place. Nothing fancy. So this is just some corded elastic. It's probably about a 2 millimeter cord, and it's cut to 11 inches, which is pretty good length for this application. And what you would do is you would stitch that in and then tie those ends up once that's stitched in. However, I ran out of this, so that might be the case with you as well. It's hard to find elastic right now because everybody needs a mask. So if you're having a hard time finding elastic, what you can do is you can use a rubber band, a little ponytail holder. So these are the kind that are kind of a fabric covered ponytail holder, and they work really well, and they seem to be a good size for this particular pattern. So what I'm gonna do next is, so we have this little tab, remember, that we have in our pattern. We're just gonna give that a little fold, about 1/2 inch, and then we're gonna put this elastic ponytail holder right over that fold, and then fold it one more time. This is a rolled hem, but we're also making a casing out of it. Make sure that your rubber band is going to be out of the way of your stitch, and you're just going to stitch that in place. And you'll do that on the other side as well. So I have my ponytail holders stitched in place with my nice rolled hem tabs folded over and stitched up, and now you can really see where this is going. And what we're going to do next is we're going to stitch the chin piece on. But before we stitch the chin piece on, we have to give it a hem, another rolled hem. And the rolled hem on the chin piece happens on the straight edge, okay? So you're just going to fold it over a little bit, maybe about 1/4 inch. And again, if you feel that you need to pin this, do it. Use pins. Use them if you need to. And then we have a chin piece, and then it's got a nice little rolled hem. We're also going to want to pay attention to the center notch that we cut earlier. And we're going to want to locate the bottom of the mask and the center seam. This is important. And this is where some pins can really be helpful for you. You're going to line the notch up with the center seam at the bottom of the mask, and then you're going to make sure that it matches up with the edge of the mask where the ear loop is. You're going to want to kind of avoid stitching on top of that elastic, and you should have plenty of room to do that. We're going to take about 1/4 inch up to 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew the chin in place. And this can be a bit tricky. You're going to want to start with the chin on top of the mask. That's going to be the easiest way to do this. And you're just going to do it. Start sewing. As you get closer to the center, you check your notch, make sure it looks like it's going to line up. If it doesn't look like it's going to line up, then you'll probably need to stop and do some adjustments. That might mean that your hem, your rolled hem up here, you didn't take enough for your rolled hem, or maybe you took too much for your rolled hem. When you get to the center, it's important to check and make sure that you don't have any wrinkles, because this is where the fabric is meeting an extreme curve and you could end up stitching into a wrinkle. You don't want to do that. So the chin is in place, and I'm going to turn this right side out, and I'm going to see here's the mask, here's the chin area. I'm not done yet though. I need to do a top stitch, and when I do the top stitch, I'm going to turn my seam allowance up toward the mask part, not toward the chin. I'm turning the seam allowance, the selvage edge, up toward the mask, and then I'm just going to do a real simple top stitch. When I get to the center, I want to make sure that I'm not going too fast, because I could break my needle. So slow down to go over the bulk that is in the center. Use the wheel if you have to on the side of your machine to walk through it. And that's how you make a mask.